Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Monday, June 9th, 2025. Alastair Crooke will be here with us in just a moment on what is Moscow really thinking about the drone attacks from NATO last week. But first, this. While the markets are giving us whiplash, have you seen the price of gold? It's soaring. In the past 12 months, gold has risen to more than $3,000 an ounce. I'm so glad I bought my gold. It's not too late for you to buy yours. The same experts that predicted gold at $3,200 an ounce now predict gold at $4,500 or more in the next year. What's driving the price higher? Paper currencies. All around the world, they are falling in value. Big money is in panic as falling currencies shrink the value of their paper wealth. That's why big banks and billionaires are buying gold in record amounts. As long as paper money keeps falling, they'll keep buying, and gold will keep rising. So do what I did. Call my friends at Lear Capital. You'll have a great conversation, and they'll send you very helpful information. Learn how you can store gold in your IRA tax and penalty free, or have it sent directly to your doorstep. There's zero pressure to buy, and you have a 100% risk-free purchase guarantee. It's time to see if gold is right for you. Call 800-511-4620, 800-511-4620, or go to LearJudgeNap.com and tell them your friend the judge sent you. Alastair, good day, my friend. Welcome here. Thank you for accommodating my schedule. Are you, after examining for a week the various news reports and other sources of information available to us about the NATO attack on Russia using drones last week, and are you still of the view that this was little more than a pinprick and a PR stunt?
Absolutely no change in what I said last week, except I didn't think I had said it was, I said it turned out to be a pinprick. But of course, the attack was much more serious in its intent. This targeted all 5 airfields housing strategic bombers, all 5. Now, as it turned out, 3 of those attacks failed. For whatever reason, the roof didn't open, there was a malfunction in the system. But the attack took place on 2. Now, what I said was in the sense that it was a pinprick in the way in which the exaggeration of the amount of damage done was huge. I don't know. The Russians say no aircraft have been destroyed. I would say that it's between 3 and 7, something like that, which were destroyed out of a total of about 55 of these big nuclear bombers. So it was a strategic attack on the triad, on the nuclear system. Yes, of course, it didn't work this time. It wasn't turned out to be a fizzle, if you like, a pinprick. But what if it had worked? What happens if it's done again with more success? You know, this is not something that Putin or the leadership can ignore. This is something really serious because their own nuclear strategic doctrine determines that if a conventional force attacks their nuclear strategic triad, then Russia should respond with nuclear weapons. That's in the change that was made in recent months. So, you know, this was a hugely serious thing. And I think what you say, what do they make of it, is this, that in the subsequent conversation with Trump, Russia absolutely knows Trump knew that America was deeply involved in it, and Trump knows that Putin knows that. And that is the basis of their discussion. However, Putin also understands Trump better than perhaps many of us do, and that he knows that what you don't do with Trump is humiliate him by exposing this, by saying, you know, that this was an attack, this was orchestrated by the CIA, by other intelligence services Part of it was, if you like, part of it was certainly terrorist. Other parts on the bridge and on, if you like, the trains were terrorist attacks. But the main thing was what was behind why attack all 5 strategic airfields? Well, Putin has got to say, is there something behind this plan? Is this a plan not just to have if you like, a pleasant affair, but is this something that is going to lead up to the future that the West is preparing for war with Russia and wants to, if you like, identify ways in which it can target one component of its nuclear triad? So I think that is the case. The other part of it, which gets messed up and gets muddled, because I don't think people understand why he keeps talking about Putin keeps talking about, if you like, the terrorist element of it, is because Russia is in the process of moving from a special operation to a counter-terrorist operation. This is a procedural process required by law and implies different constraints. For example, in the special military operation, you can't target the leaders of Kiev. But under a counter-terrorist operation, all that changes. There are not the same restrictions imposed. So this was a procedural way of doing it. He didn't go on about how America was clearly behind this, and America and Britain particularly, and others were behind this attack on the airfields, because he didn't want to humiliate. What would be the point of cornering Trump at this stage?
Right.
Why humiliate him?
When President Trump told the American public that he told Putin that the United States had nothing to do with this, was he lying to Putin, or was he lying to the American public, or was he lying to both?
Of course he was, it wasn't true. And as I say, Putin knows it wasn't true. And he knows that Putin knows it wasn't true. And I'm told by people in Russia that this is the basis of their discussion. We don't go into these very sensitive categories. So it was probably made actually not only for that, but for the American public, but more important for the Senate and the others who do not wish to acknowledge and refuse to acknowledge that this is a war launched on the United States. Now, I've seen people who say, oh, no, but perhaps America didn't know anything about it. It's nonsense. I mean, I know how the CIA work. They don't sit in their embassies and just receive reports from the Ukrainians. They are probably on the other side of the man's desk. If they're not on the other side of his desk, they're in an anteroom next to them. They don't sit far away. They're on the ground everywhere and in all of these bureaucratic organizations of Kiev. And so are other intelligence services. So they knew. There's no doubt.
Do you think that Donald Trump personally approved of this, authorized it, signed off on it before it happened, or learned about it when it was too late to stop it?
No, I've seen Kellogg's latest piece that he put on to X, Twitter, in which he says, well, with my great experience as a general and a former military commander, I found that, innovative, unexpected, special forces type operations, they really can change the whole paradigm of a war. They really can do this. So obviously he knew. And I suspect that what happened was that, we have this thing called credible deniability in the West, where, leaders are supposed to lie in order to preserve deniability. And I think probably his team sat with him and said, listen, Mr. President, something bad is going to happen in Ukraine. Now, I don't think you need to have all the details, but, this really may end up by putting pressure on Putin to agree to the ceasefire. This is going to change the psyche of this war and actually put pressure on Putin to come to our terms. In practice, it's done the opposite. It's done completely the opposite because they don't understand Russia.
Are the Ukrainians and their MI6 and CIA and maybe Mossad, I'll ask you about Mossad in a minute, collaborators, naive enough to think that something like this would drive Putin to the negotiating table rather than drive Putin to retaliation, serious, severe retaliation?
Absolutely. They do believe in this. We said, we've had it from Kellogg and several times. We have to put pressure. The only way that Russia comes to terms with an adversary is under pressure. Pressure, pressure. Yes, this is an article of faith in the United States, both in the deep state and in their security bureaucracy.
Here's the X from General Kellogg. I think General Kellogg is full of nonsense, and you may have used the same word to describe him. I'll read it. This is his posting. In my military experience, and history has shown, bold leadership and audacious action can change the nature of the battlefield, as seen by, and he goes to a link, this weekend. This event can be a forcing function for peace, but both sides must remain committed to President Trump's mission, stop the killing and end the war. This guy doesn't want to stop the killing and end the war. He wants to keep battering Putin using Ukraine.
Yeah. Forces, this forces the situation. Forces it which way? Well, clearly Putin to agree to the American proposals, Kellogg proposals for a ceasefire. I mean, it's extremely stupid and not understanding. And what is done, and I think I said this before, I found it when I was in St. Petersburg just recently, that everyone has now changed their view. I mean, even in liberal St. Petersburg, it's all clear. They say the war must go on. We have spent blood in getting this far. And if there was a ceasefire or an agreement at this point, that blood would have been wasted. And that what is more, we will have to spend more blood in 4 years' time when the Americans and the British have rearmed Ukraine and sent them on the next phase of it. So we are not, no one supports that. The troops on the ground, ordinary people, and everyone understands that, Putin understands that very clearly, that the war has to go on. So he's not under pressure any longer from people who are saying, oh, well, he's not doing enough. He should be moving quicker. He should be doing this or that. He's not under pressure because everyone understands what he's doing is playing chess, really, with the American psyche. As I mentioned, he's trying to, that's why I'm saying he doesn't humiliate Trump. He doesn't say, in your nose, look, we know you were involved with all these things. We know MI6 was involved in that. There was no point in doing that because we know, and he knows, and this is the very important thing, that in Russia, it's understood that Trump believes this bill, this big, beautiful bill, with, if you like, stuck at the moment in the Senate, I think it's going perhaps there today or something, this bill, which is vital to keeping his very disparate coalition together, that if it doesn't pass, or getting it to pass until it passes, he is hamstrung in his ability to be taken seriously by Putin. So he knows, and that's why I think he's now backing off somewhat from supporting Ukraine, because he knows that Putin knows that he can't move because of the bill. They read politics, they read what's going on in America, and they know that with 80% of the Senate in favor of escalation, as seemingly, or in favor of sanctions on Russia, unless Trump can wind that back, unless he can come to terms and get his bill through, he seems powerless to Putin, to the rest of the world. He seems as if with no ability to actually change politics.
Here's the first public statement he made about this. It's in the Oval Office on Thursday. You wrote a piece early last week pointing out how odd and peculiar it was that Trump was silent for a couple of days. Here's how he broke the silence. Now, I suggest to you what he said was very childlike. And I'm going to ask you, how does the Kremlin read this? President Trump in the Oval Office on Thursday, June 5, cut number 1.
But sometimes you see two young children fighting like crazy. They hate each other and they're fighting in a park. And you try and pull them apart. They don't want to be pulled. Sometimes you're better off letting them fight for a while and then pulling them apart. And I gave that analogy to Putin yesterday. I said, President, maybe you're going to have to keep fighting and suffering a lot because both sides are suffering before you pull them apart, before they're able to be pulled apart. But it's a pretty known analogy. You have two kids, they fight. Sometimes you let them fight for a little while. You see it in hockey. You see it in sports. The referees let them go for a couple of seconds, let them go for a little while before you pull them apart. And maybe, and I said it, and maybe that's a negative because we're saying go, but a lot of bad blood. There's some bad blood between the two.
Do you have any understanding of what's going on there?
None, because, I mean, quite clearly for Russia, this is an existential war. And to categorize it as sort of children tussling in the playground is both condescending and humiliating towards Russia. And the Russians all see that. This is why they're getting so angry. And I think I've described it before, that they feel, the West, they really are disliking the West intensely. So it was a terrible analogy to make. But the whole thing we've seen, they're of course watching what happens with Elon Musk and Trump. And they see this as another childish. Some of the language was just like children or teenagers sort of squabbling and hitting out each other. But they see it as something much more serious. They see it as the beginning of the erosion of the Trump, if you like, project. Why? Because you have within that system, if you like, totally contradictory currents. You have the tech brothers who have a rather dystopian view of the future, which is all about the future based on robotics and tech and control of the people. And on the other hand, you have the populists who want to get back a real human economy again, which is the opposite to what the Elon Musk, Andrew, and all his colleagues in that, who want something quite different from it.
Do you think that in the Kremlin, they are asking each other, who controls American foreign policy?
Of course, because it is at the moment in a stage of some chaos. I mean, America has sort of three different visions about its own economic future. I mean, the Democrats have the vision of Keynesianism, and parts of the, if you like, the tech world, the tech oligarchs, have a completely vision of extreme radical libertarianism, whereby the oligarchs are in control, like Plato's wise men who will advise America on its economic future. And then you have Trump with his own project, which is trying to rebalance, if you like, by devaluing the dollar and sort of trying to get a little bit of balance between an oversized dollar debt, global dollar debt that's sitting out there, a danger to the United States, and a contracting productive base. And he's trying to, if you like, expand one and contract the other to get better balance back. Will it work? Russia won't know any better than I would do whether this is going to work or not. But you can see these tensions and the complete, if you like, tension. Those tech oligarchs came over, changed Silicon Valley, changed and started supporting Trump. Why did they do it? It's a very interesting question. And I think one of the reasons that they did this was that apparently they'd done polls a little early and they came out so bad about the future, about American sort of feelings about oligarchs and about the business situation, for people who, lost much of their well-being over these years since the 70s, that they realized that they had to do something. They couldn't just go back to the old sort of Keynesianism of the Democrats. So they switched to the Republicans in order to try and think that, who can manage this difficult situation? Well, Trump was the only person they could think of that might find a way through this. So they put their money and their backing behind him. But it is a very contradictory sort of structure that exists.
But back to foreign policy, if they just hinted and intimated something big is going to happen and they didn't tell him so he has plausible deniability, don't they humiliate him? This is a major American, British, NATO orchestrated event, and the president of the United States did not know what was happening. Is he going to keep the same foreign policy team? Is Marco Rubio running foreign policy instead of Donald Trump?
Look, I think, what they'll have said to him. I've been in these sort of meetings. They'll have just said to him, listen, President, you don't need to have all the details, but something bad which is going to put pressure on Putin to come to our way of thinking is about to happen. But we won't give you all the details because it's better if you have deniability on this operation. That's very common. And that's probably what happened. I don't know, I'm guessing, but knowing the background of how these things are decided, I would say that's probably what happened in this case. But clearly, those advisors, and we've seen this from General Flynn, who's come out with an excoriating message saying how dangerous it was. And do these idiots not understand that attacking a nuclear powers triad, can take you to war, literally take it. He's come out, who was his previous advisor, national security advisor.
Here's what General Flynn said, and I'm quoting from your piece entitled "The Silence of the Bears," which you published late last week. Here's General Flynn, quote, "The deep state is now acting outside of the control of the elected leadership of our nation. These persons in our deep state are engaged in a deliberate effort to provoke Russia into a major confrontation with the West, including the United States," end quote, you might add, and the president of the United States didn't authorize it. Agreed?
I agree. I think it's a pity that General Flynn is no longer in the team advising the president at this moment. All he said, it was a long statement. It was very, very correct and very profound and very accurate in his warning of what's happening. And the deep state, either they don't know or they don't care and think that anything that they can do to put pressure on Russia is somehow a good thing, is misguided and can take us into dangerous situation. What is more puzzling is, why doesn't the president do something? I would say to the president, if I were there, which I won't be, but I would say, look, why don't you just say, look, that presidential finding authorizing the CIA to be responsible for attacks deep into Russia, it wasn't legal anyway, because perhaps it was signed by the autopen during the last president's presidents. Whether it was or wasn't doesn't matter. But you can say that, and then you get out of that and say it's over, it's done. But why doesn't he do something to do that? All we get is really nothing, or this talk about children on the playground having a good old Scrabble with each other in the dust. He needs to have some structure of process leading to a relationship with Russia. There are various things, like saying the old finding is no longer valid, like saying, yes, we can have, if you like, direct flights. These things can be done, except he's terrified of the Senate, with 80% of the Senate opposed either to the Iran deal or to his deal normalization with Russia, and want an escalation. This is very dangerous. So who's in charge of foreign policy The Russians may be asking himself, well, not President Trump, but it will be split up between the deep state, the Congress, and Israel.
Alastair Crooke, thank you very much. A masterful, no surprise, masterful analysis from you of all of this. Thank you for it. Thank you for letting me pick your brain, and much appreciated. We look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure, Judge.
Thank you. Coming up later today at 10 o'clock this morning, Ray McGovern. At 2 this afternoon, Aaron Mate. And at 4:30 this afternoon from Moscow on all of this, Larry Johnson. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.